This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. With Cybersecurity Awareness Month winding down, LifeLock wants to remind you to update your software. These updates will patch up security issues that identity thieves can exploit to gain access to your personal info. For comprehensive identity theft protection, there's LifeLock. LifeLock alerts you to more uses of your personal info and fixes issues that arise. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast.
Max Bankman, I'm the new doctor.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
ABC Thursdays.
This ship is heaven. We're tending to our passengers' dreams. I'm in.
From 911 executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a splashy new drama on a luxury cruise ship with Joshua Jackson and Don Johnson.
It's your job to keep everyone alive.
She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're going to be okay.
Dr. Odyssey. Thursdays, 9/8 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Streaming only on Peacock.
Being with Finch felt like I was in some fairy tale.
She's like, I write for Grey's Anatomy. I was like, what?
Her writing was so highly regarded because Finch had been through so much.
A Hollywood writer's life.
When you love somebody, you'll ignore red flags so they're hitting you in the head.
Filled with fiction.
She would do whatever it takes to get ahead.
She's sort of like a TV series.
I don't know who my wife is.
Anatomy of Lies. Streaming October 15th. Only on Peacock.
It was all a lie.
Warning. This documentary contains strong content. Listener discretion is advised. It's Sunday, November 13th, 2022. Xana's sister, Jasmine, receives a call from Xana's friend saying that something terrible has happened at 1122 King Road. Jasmine immediately jumps into her car and starts driving towards the house, which is about 15 minutes away. As she drives, she tries to reach Xana.
I called her a lot, called Ethan a lot.
She also tries to reach Xana's boyfriend, Ethan, but no one answers. Then she calls her father, Jeffrey Kernodle, and tells him they need to meet immediately at 1122 King Road. He recounts this in an interview on 48 Hours.
I hear her kind of crying and just telling me to get back to Moscow and meet me at Xana's house. And, my heart drops. Instantly, race back down there.
When Xana's father meets up with her sister at 1122 King Road, the house is completely cordoned off, and the place is swarming with police. When the family members try to find out what happened, they're asked to come to the Moscow police station. Once there, the news hits like a punch in the face when the police explain what has occurred.
4 people passed away, and that one was Xana.
The police explain that 4 people have died, and that Xana is one of them.
Your worst nightmare. It just happened, What do? You can't do a damn thing.
You are listening to the Idaho Student Murders, a documentary about the brutal murders of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. The producer of this podcast is Gabriella Lahti. I'm Jonathan Rollins. If you like this series, follow our feed, Crime by PodLit, to see when a new episode drops, and also to discover our other series. But now you're listening to the Idaho Student Murders. This is Chapter 3, a white Hyundai Elantra. As we mentioned in the previous episode, it wasn't until around noon on Sunday that the Moscow police were alerted. Before that, the 2 surviving roommates had called some of their friends. We don't know who saw what, but we know that both of Ethan's triplet brothers, who also attended the university, were among those on the scene before the police. It was also the brothers who called their parents to report the horrific events. Ethan's mother, Stacy Chapin, recounts in an interview with King 5 Seattle the phone calls she will never forget.
It's not something you ever expect to hear, ever. Like the call we took from our kids who were there, and you just expect to outlive your kids. Honestly, I don't know.
And how the family, despite their deep grief, tries to stay strong together.
Ethan was a triplet, and that's the most important thing for us because we have these other two kids that are very impacted by this, and they need to be lifted up and cared for.
The phone also rings at Kaylee's parents' home, Steve and Christy Gonsalves. They are told that something terrible has happened to their daughter, but no one knows exactly what. It's not until 4 p.m. that the police knock on their door. Kaylee's parents recount this in 48 hours.
And we said, what's going on? I can confirm your daughter's died. She's passed away.
At that point, he said there were 4 victims. And I said, 4? And he said, yes, ma'am. I said, can you tell us if one of the victims was Maddie Mogan? And he said, yes, ma'am.
Maddie's father, Ben Mogan, is at the movies on Sunday evening when his phone suddenly starts ringing in his pocket. He tells KREM2 News.
I was at the theater watching a movie and I got a couple calls, and so I took the call, and my mom just said, you have to come home, come to her house, and didn't tell me anything else.
On the way to his mother's house, thoughts raced through his mind.
I mean, the worst things came to my head, but it still wasn't as bad as what it ended up being.
After Ben's mother tells him the horrifying news, he tries to piece together how this could be possible, that his daughter Maddie was murdered so cold-bloodedly.
Yeah, I spent the rest of the night just trying to make some sense out of this, and yeah, it's just horrific. I hope no one ever has to go through something like that.
The small community of Moscow is in shock. No one can understand how something so brutal could have happened in the middle of what they felt like safety. Fear begins to spread. But in a press release published on the city's website the same day as the murders, the Moscow police announced that there is no ongoing threat to the public, a stance the police maintained the following day as well.
The home of the University of Idaho has been shaken up by the deaths of 4 students, and people there still know very little about how or why the victims were killed.
But otherwise, information is scarce.
Police say that they have released all the information that they can at this time without jeopardizing their investigation, but they insist there is no wider threat to the public, yet there have still been no arrests.
2 days after the murders, the police add a detail.
Police in the city of Moscow say the 4 University of Idaho students who were killed in this home across the street from campus Sunday were victims of a targeted attack.
A targeted attack, according to the Moscow police, though they do not explain further how they arrived at that conclusion.
My name is Chief James Fry with the Moscow Police Department. I'm going to be reading from my notes today because I want the information you received to be extremely accurate.
But 3 days later, Police Chief James Fry holds a press conference, and suddenly, the message changes.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. With Cybersecurity Awareness Month winding down, LifeLock wants to remind you to update your software. These updates will patch up security issues that identity thieves can exploit to gain access to your personal info. For comprehensive identity theft protection, there's LifeLock. LifeLock alerts you to more uses of your personal info and fixes issues that arise. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast.
We cannot say that there's no threat to the community. Please stay vigilant, report any suspicious activity, and be aware of your surroundings at all times.
The police chief is backtracking from his earlier statement that there's no ongoing risk to the public. Reporters at the press conference take notice.
I just want to clarify something you said earlier. Over the past couple of days, the information that we've been getting is there's not a threat to the public. Then earlier I heard you say you can't be sure that there is no threat. I just want to clarify what your stance is on that at this time.
So we still believe it's a targeted attack. But the reality is there's still a person out there who committed 4 horrible, horrible crimes. So I think we got to go back to there is a threat out there still, possibly. We don't know. We don't believe it's going to be to anybody else. But we all have to be aware of our surroundings and make sure that we're watching out for each other.
Days turn into weeks, and many start to question the police's somewhat confused handling of the situation. Is there a danger to the public in Moscow or not? What's happening in the search for the killer? Is anything happening at all? The victims' families begin to feel forgotten. Kaylee's father, Steve, says in an interview with the New York Post on November 27th that he hasn't heard from the police in 5 days.
Basically, long story short, it was Wednesday, 5 p.m. was the last time that they reached out to me. So, yeah, that's rough.
Sir, what are they telling you?
They're kind of just telling me that they can't tell me much, which is frustrating to me.
But is it a confused police force, or are they playing confused?
It had been 7 years since the last murder in Moscow.
This is J. Reuben Appelman, or Jay as he's called. He has written a book about the case called While Idaho Slept, and Jay guides us through this story.
And even though Chief Fry was chief of police in a very small town, he was no dummy. He had studied with the FBI. He knew homicide investigations. And in addition to that, he immediately calls in the Idaho State Police and the FBI, who assist with the investigation.
It will turn out that the Moscow police at this point have more leads than they're letting on. They've analyzed surveillance footage of the white car seen in the area during the night of the murders and now know it's a Hyundai Elantra. An internal message is sent out to several police units to keep an eye out for such a car. And on November 29th, 14 days after the murders, they make a discovery. It's a police officer at Washington State University in Washington, about a 20-minute drive from Idaho, who reports a white Hyundai Elantra.
A Washington State University police officer identifies a white Hyundai Elantra in the parking lot of an apartment complex that houses graduate students at Washington State University. That vehicle turns out to be registered to a Brian Koberger.
It turns out that the car's owner, Brian Koberger, matches the height and body type description of the man in black seen by a roommate in the house at the time of the murders. Moreover, he has bushy eyebrows. And now, the police begin to secretly track him. On November 30th, a vigil is held at the University of Idaho to honor the victims. Representatives from the university express their condolences. Family members are also present. Kaylee's father, Steve, takes the podium. With tears in his voice, he shares how his life changed when he became Kaylee's father, how he started seeing the world through her eyes.
And as a father, it's a little bit scary. You start seeing like the world starts having like this purple haze, and there's puppies and there's kitties and there's all these weird movies you have to watch. And they start crying all the time. But you start falling in love with this world that they built. It changes, and you don't have pickup trucks and all these footballs. You start seeing the beauty of what they have and what makes them special.
And he talks about the strong bond that Kaylee and Maddie had.
So then they went to high schools together. Then they started looking at colleges. They came here together. They eventually get into the same apartment together. And in the end, they died together in the same room, in the same bed. And it's a shame, and it hurts. But the beauty of the two always being together is something that it comforts us. It lets us know that they were with their best friends in the whole world. It's like a book. It's like some kind of terrible chapter, but there's beauty in it, and we're going to get our justice. We're going to figure this stuff out. This community deserves that.
Internally, the police are focusing on Brian Koberger, but outwardly, there's no sign that they have a suspect. And it doesn't take long before people start coming up with their own theories about who could have committed the brutal murders.
Hey guys, as you guys can see, we're back in front of 1122 King Road.
This is from the YouTube channel Bullhorn Betty. Bullhorn Betty is one of those who, parallel to the Moscow police's work, conducts a different kind of investigation. It happens online by so-called cyber sleuths, amateur internet detectives. These true crime enthusiasts try to solve the case on their own by examining evidence and following leads.
We are covering the case of Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Ethan Chapin. This house is still an active crime scene behind me. You see the yellow tape.
Despite the police asking the public to avoid rumors and rely only on official sources, the discussions are heated on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Reddit. Internet detectives stream live outside the student's house. They film the blood running down the house's facade and knock on doors. They dig through the victims' social media and go through surveillance footage, talk to the victims' families, compile timelines, and scrutinize photos.
So this live, I wanted to show you guys just some images that I took. I filmed the entire home from the outside. I can get footage that other people may not be able to get because my lens can literally zoom into a window.
I am back out in front of the Moscow home where 4 college students were brutally stabbed inside that home during the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Case is unsolved. Whoever did this is still out on the loose.
The amateurs do everything that professional reporters do. The difference is that the internet detectives are strongly convinced they will solve the case.
For every morsel of truth, there was a swarm of fireflies of lies flittering around, and it was hard to know what was what. And because of that, anything goes. Because of that, any YouTuber with 10,000 subscribers quickly turns that subscriber base into 20,000 as they're following this case.
Another big difference is that on their platforms, there's plenty of room for speculation and made-up theories. And these multiply as the number of users increase. It can be hard to distinguish between reality and fantasy. It's now December. A blanket of snow and sorrow lies over the small town of Moscow. Kaylee's brand new Range Rover has been towed away from the parking lot outside 1122 King Road. So has Ethan's red Jeep. While the town's residents try to recover from the trauma, unusual events start piling up before their eyes.
They've never had a mainstream news anchor, say from CNN or Fox News or NBC, come to their town for any story for whatever reason. Now they have all of the mainstream networks represented, filling up the streets with their huge Chevy Suburbans and their $1,000 winter coats, their shiny shoes that are not quite the right shoes for the terrain or for the weather, and their big hairdos.
Suddenly, the small town of Moscow is filled with press and media from all over the world. And as mentioned, the rest of the internet is also here right now.
And there's a TikToker there, and he's dancing in front of the house. The place becomes a relative circus.
And the lack of information from the police leads the internet detectives to fill the void with their own investigations and theories. Everyone is a suspect, and no one escapes scrutiny, especially not those seen in the same surveillance footage as Maddie and Kaylee. Online, people are being exposed, harassed, and falsely accused. All the online speculation also leads to a flood of tips on the police's special tip line.
There were so many tips that the FBI had to drop in a trailer dedicated solely to processing video and text clips that were sent by citizens.
Despite this, the Moscow police, who are cooperating with the state police and the FBI, continue to remain silent about the ongoing investigation. Police Chief James Fry explains in a YouTube video uploaded by the Moscow police themselves that he understands how frustrating this can be for the public and the families.
We're at that point in the investigation where we're still gathering information, we're still gathering tips, we're still gathering evidence, we're still doing everything we need to do.
But suddenly, the police decide to share something. We now know in hindsight that this was a tactical move, but at the time, it was seen as a breakthrough.
While the public and the family members of the victims are operating under the assumption that Chief Fry and the Moscow PD are struggling with the case, they have several leads that they are privately working on. One of them they take public.
On December 7th, the police issue a press release stating that they are looking for a specific vehicle.
They're searching for a white Hyundai Elantra, they say.
The police don't reveal more than that the car's owner holds crucial information.
And they say it was seen in the area at the time of the murders.
And now a new wave of tips pour in.
I saw this car in my neighborhood. I saw this car at the store. I saw this car on the freeway.
The other lead the police are secretly working on is analyzing the DNA found on the knife sheath left behind in Maddie's room, which they've also kept secret.
Nobody knows about this knife sheath.
The analysis shows that the DNA comes from a male individual, but to match a specific person to the DNA, a sample is needed directly from the person or from a close relative. But as we mentioned in the previous chapter, the police already have their eyes on a certain owner of a white Hyundai Elantra. His name is Brian Kohberger. He's 28 years old, and he's studying criminology at Washington State University. His student apartment is a 15-minute drive from 1122 King Road, but he grew up in Pennsylvania on the other side of the country, and it's there at his parents' home that he is on December 27th when he goes out to take out the trash at 4 a.m. Instead of throwing it in the trash can outside the family's house, he chooses to walk over to the neighbor's trash can some distance away. What he doesn't know is that the police are watching him and see his strange behavior with the trash.
They don't know exactly why he's doing that, but they take the trash and they run it through their labs back in Idaho. What is found in the trash, among other items, is DNA that is a paternal match, meaning a fatherly match, to the DNA found on the knife sheath that was left behind at the scene of the murders.
The police managed to create a DNA profile from the Kohberger family's trash. The DNA profile turns out to come from the biological father of the man whose DNA was found on the knife sheath, and Michael Kohberger has only one son. On December 29th, 2022, Brian Kohberger is arrested.
Last night, detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on a warrant for murders of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee.
On December 30th, the Moscow police hold a press conference. Police Chief James Fry announces that they have arrested Brian Kohberger and that he is the only suspect. The public can breathe a sigh of relief. Moscow is once again a safe place, he says.
I want to express my appreciation to our local community, the people of Idaho, and those throughout our nation who provided information to help us investigate these murders has been very impressive.
Have the police really caught the killer? And what evidence ties him to the crime? In the next chapter of the Idaho student murders, the Moscow police are convinced that 28-year-old Brian Kohberger murdered Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan. But who is he?
Growing up, he was extremely awkward.
I felt no emotion, and along with the depersonalization, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. Everyone hates me, pretty much. I am an asshole.
How is he perceived by those around him before the murders?
Brian Kohberger is quite grumpy seeming to his students. He is easily agitated. He's a hard grader. He is rude, according to his students. He is unfair, according to his students.
I try to sleep. I try to clear my head. but the pressure won't go away, the pain and depression won't leave. Being me is this horrible disease that I was given.
After the murders,
in nearby Moscow, his whole demeanor changes.
And what evidence links Brian Kohberger to the crime scene at King Road on November 13th, 2022? That was the third chapter of the Idaho student murders. This documentary is produced by Gabriella Lahti. Sound design and final mix by Jens Nielsen and Tomas Rajnai. Executive producer is Tove Leffler. My name is Jonathan Rollins. And if you like this series, don't forget to follow Crime by PodLit so you can find our other podcasts and also be notified when a new episode of this series is released. The clips you've heard in this episode are from the YouTube channels Bullhorn Betty, Chronicles of Olivia, JLR Investigates, Moscow Police, NBC News, 48 Hours, King 5 Seattle, and KREM2 News.